But I don't know if you guys have much exposure to philosophers, but we care about weird things. I'm the kind of guy you can sit around with having a debate for hours about whether or not numbers are real. Okay, I will have long conversations about the ontology of set theory until the cows come home. But this is not the kind of thing that's going to make a radical, profound difference in my life. I mean, even if that was my academic specialty, it wouldn't make a radical, profound difference in my life. So yeah, I care about it as an academic question. But anything beyond the academic, the ways in which God is supposed to matter, in the sort of deep existential, spiritual senses, I think that the question is irrelevant. The question is immaterial. You could prove to me right now, absolutely, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that God exists, and it wouldn't change my plans for the night. I would plan on hanging out with you fine people, going home, watching a little Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and falling asleep. And that would be it. And then my weekend would continue pretty much the way I have it planned. It would not transform anything in my life. Even if I were to undergo right now a complete spontaneous reconversion to faith. I do not believe it would change me in any sort of profound way. And I don't think it would change you. I think God could materialize right here next to me. And indeed, okay, it would be shocking, of course. You know, this would be one of those things I was not expecting that to happen. In that sense, you know, I would probably want to call the New York Times or something like that. It would be, again, a shocking revelation in the same way that, you know, if a giant pink elephant were to show up here spontaneously, that would be a shocking revelation too. But it would not fulfill this, again, this deep existentialist notion that many people seem to just presume. So it's one thing for me to claim that I don't care. It's another thing entirely for me to claim that you don't care and that most people don't care. So I think it's fair to assume that most of you, if not all of you, do not believe in God, or at least you are skeptical that God exists. So let's all collectively agree, for the sake of argument, to assume right now that there is a God. God exists, He's real. What happens next? You know, where do we go from there? Do we all get down on our knees and start praying to Him? Do we start worshiping? Do we rush back to church? I mean, what exactly follows? I mean, some of you might think that, yeah, that would be a reasonable reaction. You know, I mean, if there is a God, then I want to make sure I get right with God, and that's going to be a really important thing, to reconcile myself to God. Otherwise, I face His vengeance, and that's not something I want to face. I'll return to that idea in a moment. But first off, I want to say, you don't want to jump down on your knees just yet, because I haven't said which God. Maybe this is a God that gets pissed off if you pray to Him. So you don't, if you're concerned about propitiating this God, getting in His good graces, you can't, it's not enough to know that God exists. You have to know precisely which God exists. And if you have at all any exposure to you know, world religious history, you know that there is a roster of potentially thousands that we might be talking about that have mutually incompatible characteristics and desire mutually incompatible things from us. So we can't simply say there's a God. We have to say which God before we can know what to do with that information. But okay, maybe that is a cheap philosopher's trick though. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, it is the Christian God. That is the God, of course, which most of us are familiar with, most of us are accustomed to, the God of Abraham. Well, this still leaves a lot open, of course. Does this God want me to hate homosexuals or love them? This is the kind of thing that Christians are very much divided on. So even if we assume it is the Christian God, there still is a whole lot of open questions out there which have yet to be resolved, even if we identified that this Christian God is real. But at least it settles some things. You know, I mean, I can think, if it is the Christian God, we can reasonably assume, for example, that He wants us to believe in Him, He wants us to worship Him, to accept His Son Jesus as our Savior, and so forth and so on. You know, all of these things at least seem to be fairly common to the Christian tradition. So let's, you know, we can make some progress with that. So let's assume it is the Christian God that exists. Does this change my life? Will I start praying and going to church and so forth and wanting to commune with God in all these sorts of ways? Well, personally, no, I wouldn't. You know, again, I would find it interesting. It would be a fascinating topic for conversations with other, you know, people who are inclined to discuss this sort of thing, but it would not change my life. But again, that's a fairly easy thing for me to say. I would need to be trying to convince you that it wouldn't change your lives either. It seems to me there's at least two possible reasons why it might bring about change. The first is what you might call the pragmatic reason. I don't want to burn in hell, so I'm going to do what I have to do to make sure that God doesn't send me to hell. And if that means going to church every Sunday, then damn it, I'm getting up at 8 a.m. every Sunday. It's worth it. It's a worthwhile trade-off. That's perhaps the more old school approach to God, if you will. Then there's maybe the more liberal approach, which is, well, it's not that, I'm afraid God will punish me. God is loving. That's not what I think about the kind of God is. But I want to commune with God. I want to take part in His wonder and His glory and His majesty and so forth and so on. So there might be other reasons besides these, but I don't want to be here all night with you, so I'm going to limit myself to these two possible reasons. I don't want to burn in hell, and I want to commune with God. So, what do I say to the person who says, it would transform my life because I don't want to go to hell? Now, obviously, I do not want to go to hell. I would not embrace that prospect. But frankly, I would rather go to hell than spend eternity with a deity whose character is such that He would send me to hell for simply not worshiping Him. If those were my choices, I would honestly take hell. Thank you. But maybe that's just me and the one or two of you in the audience. Maybe the rest of you are not so defiant. Maybe you're saying, yeah, okay, have fun in hell. I'm going to go worship God because I don't want to burn. And fair enough. I would not judge anyone for making such a decision. But the core point here is the following. All that proves is that you care whether or not there's a hell. It doesn't prove you care whether or not there's a God. These are actually two distinct things. We conflate them in our minds very often. We are so accustomed to thinking of God and the afterlife as being one and the same that it's easy to forget that these two things actually come apart. There are many religions in which there are no gods, but there is an afterlife. And there are other religions in which there are gods, but no afterlife. So, what matters in this scenario has nothing to do with whether or not God exists, and everything to do with whether or not hell exists. So yes, I will grant you it makes a difference whether or not hell exists. But it does not yet follow that it makes a difference whether or not God exists. Now the immediate response, of course, is going to be, well, but God gets to decide whether or not we go to heaven or not. God is the judge. Well, I might then quickly refer back to my prior point about God being rather kind of judgmental in this regard. But to step forward from that, I think the alternative point is to then turn it around and say, okay, so presumably what's the alternative? If not hell, then what? Obviously heaven. Well, I would argue, and this is the sort of thing I will be happy to elaborate on later. I don't quite have time to get into the argument because it's kind of a sophisticated one right now. I'm simply going to put the suggestion out there for you guys to chew over, and if you want, follow up with me later. I will maintain that any eternal afterlife, no matter how it is characterized, will be hellish. It is of the sort of thing that if any of us were to go there, or any other human being were to go there, blissful it may be at first, but eternity is a bitch, like Tom Stoppard says. When's it going to end? Think about the most fun you've ever had in your life. Maybe you love playing golf. Play golf for 1 billion years, and then you've still got eternity to look forward to. There is no sensible way in which you or I could possibly exist in an eternal paradisical afterlife. If you tried to put us there, sooner or later it would devolve into hell. So whether or not there is a God is still not the question. Whether or not heaven or hell exists, that's the real question. And I would say that while hell may be a possibility, heaven is not. Okay, so that's the old school. What about the new school? The more liberal approach to theology. That God isn't the judge who condemns people to hell, fire and brimstone, so God is the being you commune with, the being you bask in His holy light and so forth. The purpose of our lives is to reconcile ourselves to Him. What if I want to communicate? What if I'm an atheist who doesn't believe in God, but would like to believe in God because I like the idea of communing with God? What do I say to that person? I say, well, what's stopping you? The mere fact that you don't believe in God shouldn't stop you from trying to commune with Him. God doesn't have to exist to commune with Him. Billions of theists commune with God every single day, His non-existence notwithstanding. So clearly, there's nothing preventing the atheist from getting down on his knees and praying and worshiping to God. In fact, there are many closeted atheists who have yet to just sort of come out of the closet, who are so accustomed to that religious tradition, like Dr. Connolly was talking about. It's such a part of them naturally that they still go through the motions. They still pray, they still say the catechism, they still go through any sort of number of religious hoop jumpings that they do, even though they don't believe. So if all you want is that to commune with God, you can do it whether or not God exists. Again, God doesn't have to exist for you to have that.